All right, everybody. Of course, to start off, clearing my throat. Nice. Welcome to the podcast. This is Along the Watchtower. I am your host, LM Walker. For new listeners, because I realized I've been looking at the set and getting some new subscribers, new listeners. Thank you. On the podcast, you will hear things that brought you here in the first place. I will simply read the news and express my opinion, my take, my dissemination of it. I will try to paint a picture with previous articles, previous topics of conversation. Well, really, previous topics of things that I've expressed my opinion on. Really, my commentary, that is, and I try to weave them together to paint a clearer overall picture. Because what it is with every article that comes out, there's interest that's brought there for the time being, but it doesn't. They don't do well enough, I feel like, to try and paint an overarching scope. It's generally information that is spruaned about a shaped narrative, a manufactured narrative that's designed to elicit certain emotions within you. Above all else, interest. But secondly to interest, I think not necessarily secondly, but more peripheral, right? It's just as important, is eliciting a particular sense of tribe within you, whether it be from conservative publications or from more liberal ones. As we've previously talked about, or I've talked about, faith, not faith, but confidence in mainstream media is at an all-time low. Axios did a poll, 46%. 53%, I think this is also an Axios poll that we talked about, believe that other Americans are the highest, the greatest threat to them right now. So on top of a heightened, not overly, although 56% is still high, and that again, people get the idea of polling, I think, sort of hyperbolized. They think that somehow pollsters are able to reach, millions of people. It's like, no, it's a pool of like 1,500 people, and even that's kind of large. It's generally, like, on average, I would say probably 500 to 1,000 people if you want to get a good estimate, a good sentiment. And it tries to get an idea as best as it can with, as microcosmic of a pool as we can get. 1,000 people out of 300 million, 350 million ain't shit, but it gives you an idea, a sense, especially given what the media, because everyone, you can't presume that everyone's on YouTube and looking through articles for hours and hours. The average person goes to work. By the way, before I continue, I just realized today is February 17th. It's a Wednesday, 2021. They go through their life to continue, and they go to work, and they eat, and they poop, and they sleep, and sometimes, hopefully, they get laid. There's not a lot of time there in between to, to discern, disseminate, to sift through, to try and dissect all of this. Even me, who dedicates himself to it a bit, is greatly overwhelmed, especially given the variety of topics that I want to talk about. There's more than enough to talk about within the realm of, like, and this is basically, it's just basically Beltway politics. This is everything that's going on the Hill, the infighting amongst the parties, the movers and shakers either falling off by the wayside, becoming Trumpists within the Republican Party. You notice we haven't gotten a lot of news about Democrats or about progressives. That's because they finally got their fucking act together for the time being. For the time being, they've actually rallied around the progressive base that got them elected in the... I've got to calm down. It got them elected in the first place. Everyone, we now see an alignment between what is politically expedient and useful for them and what is beneficial to the constituency. Yes, I know when I say that, you're listening like, wait. So you're telling me the things that got these people elected weren't necessarily the things that were beneficial to their constituencies, the people they represented? That is correct. A lot of the time, these people got elected through money. Okay. So the fact of the matter remains is that spending on ad campaigns and the ability to, I don't want to say control, but the ability to influence or otherwise undercut any serious journalistic digging or vetting into a candidate is one, like, surefire way to victory. If you can keep the press off of you, you're pretty good. right? They're not digging up skeletons. They're not asking pressing questions about your personal life, let alone your policy decisions. They're not asking questions about policy decisions that you made before, right? Because you're not telepathic, you're not, omnipotent, you're omniscient. You didn't know you were going to run for president. Well, a lot of these sharks, they have very high ambitions. But let's say hypothetically, you didn't know you were going to run for president in 20 years, so I don't know, snorted coke off somebody's tits in the congressional halls. I don't know. The point is that if you can keep the press off of you, that is greatly beneficial to any potential candidate, right? So, and then all of that takes money. And the more money that you draw into a candidacy, the more beholden you are to those who are giving you the money that aren't the constituency you represent. Because then conversely, we have Bernie Sanders, who set record after record, so did Trump, for small donations from individual recipients, right? And here's the weird thing. Here's the irony, right? Obama was supposed to be like the candidate of the people. Yes, we can. We are change, but yes, we can. And things like that, etc. That didn't manifest itself. But what ended up manifesting itself, besides Trump for the GOP, was the grassroots movement that lifted Sanders up not once, but twice throughout two different elections, right? And so we'd finally reached a critical breaking point in which the lack of representation that was occurring election after election, midterm after midterm, whether it be from the state level on high through the Fed right up onto the White House, the lack of representation that was occurring for the plebeians, for the little guy, for the average person, had finally motivated physical action and manifested itself in the form of a Bernie Sanders near presidential race. So, here we are. In the post 9/11, they're talking about 9/11 again now because they're talking about bringing up a 9/11 style. So, okay. What I talked about yesterday that Representative Jacobs from California was talking about, I believe is different than so there's a Truth Commission, and then there's the 9/11 Commission. So the Truth Commission is supposed to establish a consistent narrative about the history of this country, in particular to race and blah, 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 blah. Critical race theory stuff. The 9/11 Commission, right, that's being posited, I don't want to say by Elizabeth Warren. Off the top of my head, I can't recall. But I think it's Nancy Pelosi. What am I talking about? Nancy Pelosi, Speaker Pelosi herself. That Pelosi's trying to forward is similar to the 9/11 Commission. There's two type of commissions that are going on. There are two type of commissions that have been brought about by the same critical issue, as a result of the insurrection. Whisper. But anyway, that being said, please like, share, and subscribe. I don't know why my eyes are drying out. So if you're watching, don't mind me blinking a lot. It's not Morse code. I'm not being held against my will. But we will be covering a bunch of stuff, most of the Beltway shit. Well, I will actually try to get to COVID today, but like, share, and subscribe. Always trying to do better. The Shure mic is on the way. The smooth, luxurious sounds of the SM7B. You know what? We're going to talk about Rush Limbaugh being dead. Now, I know what you're thinking, like, why the fuck are you talking about Rush Limbaugh? Like, I didn't listen to the guy. I mean, I listened to him as far as anyone listens to anything when they want to laugh, right? He was amusing to me. He was one of the, and see, here's the thing. When you start listening to commentators, unless you're born of politics, unless you've been around people who are involved in politics, you don't really realize that they're all grifters, right? It is highly unlikely that a lot of these, like 90% of these people on the radio, on television, on mainstream media, proselytizing and criticizing and hyperbolizing and completely being antithetical half the time to the things that they're supposed to be espousing to support, right? Acting so irate, and it's just like, stop your theater, right? I say 90% of them don't even buy into what they're talking about, And Rush Limbaugh was one of the OGs of them. Bill O'Reilly was one of the OGs. Joe Scarborough was one of the OGs. They're all fucking grifters. Okay, here's the thing. I think they believe to a degree. Obviously, there had to be some conviction there to some extent to get them to the position that they are in, to have them pursue it to that extent. But I think after a certain point, right, there's just no way. There's no way. And it's just like, well, what's worse? The grift when you don't believe it, or the grift when you do? Because it's still a grift. You're still over dramatizing your monstrous misanthropic nature for money. Like, you're still putting on an exhibition of yourself for money, because despite the fact that the majority of people don't want to hear your shit, that there's still enough people that want to hear your shit, and you can get paid for that. Ultimate grift. Be that as it may, guy's dead, right? And you would think that there would be some respect there, but there's not. And my whole thing about it for me is to not become the monster you are trying to slay, to not embody the hate that you are trying to ostracize, to get rid of, to not like let in that toxicity and that poison, right? Because I can imagine that he himself thought like that about quite a few people. Like, oh, I'm glad this motherfucker's dead. That's what he gets. I hope he chokes on a fat one. Like, do you really want... That's the interesting full circle of it. Like, oh, I'm going to tout the hate that the hater touts. And like, oh, great. So now you two have something in common. Like, why would you do that to yourself? Don't do that. It's just hilarious. It is hilarious. I say that and people are like, nah, man, fuck that. Da-da-da. It's like, well, now you're both just volatile, bigoted people. You're both just expressing poison. You're poisoning the well, both of you. Like, now I want both of you away from me. See, so that's where I stand. And my whole thing about it is like, defending yourself is one thing. And I know it's like, where is he going with this? Defending yourself is one thing, whether verbally or otherwise. It's being the antagonizer. It's being the provocateur. People love to start shit and then justify their starting shit by saying that they're the victim. Listen, I know that you've been through some shit, but you're still starting shit, and that's making things worse. But I digress. Yeah, let's get to the news, right? I wanted to start things off with something. outside of the Beltway, and also somewhat related. Not really, kind of, sort of, maybe. Update: U.S. charges 3 North Koreans in $1.3 billion hacking spree. So, if you recall the SolarWinds hack that happened, it touched multiple sectors of industry, Department of Energy, Commerce, blah, 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 blah. So at first they were saying it was Cozy Bear. And then they were saying, well, it was Cozy Bear sponsored by... First they were saying it was state-sponsored Cozy Bear. And then they were saying, well, maybe it was just Cozy Bear or some independent actors. And then they were like, well, China was also hacking the day before. So this was kind of like maybe it was coordinated, but at the very least, the timing is suspicious. We just seem to be mass hacked. And now come to find out, well, it seems that there's just multiple mass attacks happening on multiple sectors all at once, right at the tail end of the Trump administration between like December and now. And here's the thing about the SolarWinds hack is that it was actually ongoing. It just got discovered around December. And then others were followed. But anyway, I digress. Let's just read. The United States has charged 3 North Korean computer programmers with a massive hacking spree that stole more than $1.3 billion in money and cryptocurrency, affecting companies from banks to Hollywood movie studios, the Department of Justice said on Wednesday. The indictment alleges that Jang Chang-hyuk, 31, and Kim Il, 27, and Park Jin-hyuk, 36, stole money while working for North Korea's military intelligence services. Park had previously been charged in a complaint unsealed in 2018. The Department of Justice said the hackers are responsible for a wide range of criminal activity and high-profile cyber attacks, including a retaliatory November 2014 attack on Sony Pictures Entertainment for producing The Interview with Seth Rogen and what's his name? Seth Rogen and that other guy, which depicted the assassination of North Korea's leader. It also alleged that they participated in the creation of the destructive WannaCry 2.0 ransomware, which hit Britain's National Health Service particularly hard when it was set loose in May of 2017. It's really bothering me. I can't remember his name. Uh, what is James Franco? That motherfucker. Yeah, you ever see Spider-Man 3 and he eats the pie and then he looks back and he's like, I'm not a fan of James Franco. But yeah, North Korea. So Facebook to ban users, publishers in Australia from sharing, viewing news content, and a slap at the new regulation. So, if you've heard the show before, you understand where I stand on this and the power that the Silicon left has. Even if they weren't as biased as it's evident that they are, the fact remains that the plutocratic, oligarchical nature of government makes it inevitable that the interconnectivity of government and the private tech industry will only increase. So this is why, you'll see these committees being formed, and you'll see Zucky go up there and act like an asshole in front of Congress and on television, get away with it, pay a fine, get a slap on the wrist, go on and do it again. And they basically do whatever they want. All right, Twitter Twitter did something similar first. After the U.S. presidential election, Nigeria, I believe, was the country, took a look at the effect that social media was having, both negatively and positively, and because there are positive aspects to it, and they banned Twitter for their upcoming elections. And I thought that was amazing. I thought it was hilarious. So I guess in a preemptive move, Facebook has done the opposite and has banned users from being able to view news. So let's read, because this is what I mean about the consolidation of power, the ability to express oneself, and whether or not the plebeian, the average person, understands how thin the wall is between them basically doing what they want and you being able to say how you feel outside of hateful language and language that incites violence. Right? And the thing you're thinking is well, it's a private business. It's well, that's true. While that is true, one, they should be following their terms of service, right? And they're not banning or moderating a good faith, which is the whole point of 230 of the Communications Decency Act. We've talked about that before. Because the problem is that the line keeps changing. Given the current zeitgeist, whatever is controversial or disliked by the Twitterati at the time is generally the thing that they decide they're going to ban. A prime example is the BLM activist who still has all his social media up, even though he's on film antagonizing rioters at Capitol Hill, at the Capitol Hill insurrection, right? His affiliation is neither here nor there. If you're going to restrict one, you need to do it across the board. Facebook, to finally read, deadline here, Facebook will restrict publishers and users in Australia from sharing or viewing Australian and international news content as the parliament there debates a law that would force tech and social media platforms, namely it and Google, to pay more for journalism on their sites. And it's is it a threat? Is it a threat based off of, here's the thing, because it can be perceived a couple different ways, right? It's one of those things okay, well, look at your world. It's probably all of the above. It's look at how people will deal when they're not able to view their news through Facebook or publish their news through Facebook. Also, it's one of those things where it's okay, well, if Facebook is important in your country and I can do this, imagine what I'll do if you actually slap this regulation on and I decide maybe I'll just pull Facebook from Australia altogether. It's probably all of the above. Any machination of movement, of maneuvering that you can think he's doing, he's definitely doing. The announcement came shortly after, and he's ruthless. The announcement came shortly after Rupert Murdoch's News Corp said it had carved out a 3-year deal with Google to provide journalism from its news sites around the world, including Australia, where the publisher has its roots, in return for what it called significant payments by the internet giant. Google's going to pay News Corp for news. Ugh. Taking a different tact in the brewing news storm, William Easton, managing director, Facebook Australia and New Zealand, said Australia's new proposed law fundamentally misunderstands the relationship between our platform and publishers who use it to share news content. It has left us facing a stark choice: attempt to comply with a law that ignores the realities of this relationship, or stop allowing news content on our services in Australia. With a heavy heart, we are choosing the latter. Australia has taken the hardest line of any country so far with the legislation that would force digital platforms to negotiate with media companies on payment for using their news. New law would require binding arbitration if the two sides failed to reach a deal. It would also require tech platforms to give publishers collective bargaining power and give them notice to any algorithm changes that would materially affect traffic. Nice. See, that's a very important thing. We've talked about that, about like shadow banning, and things of that nature, in terms of YouTube, removing subscriptions, in terms of Google, algorithm changes. But yeah, see, the situation with Google and News Corp is a little different than Facebook because individuals post on Facebook. So in order for individuals to post from any news source, Facebook would have to first work out a deal with that publication, and that's why that doesn't work. So now I see. I see. Well, it's like, well, forget it. You can't do any of it. You can't do any of it. And you know that it's all about money. Much ado about money. So that's enough of that. More on the Orwellian front. LAPD requested Amazon Ring footage from Black Lives Matter protests. Need I say more? No. If you have a Ring doorbell, reads Mashable, your local police department may request your help in surveilling protests. And here's the thing, okay, don't get it twisted. I've talked about this often. BLM protests that are violent are not something that I condone. The burning, and that's another thing. I know I was supposed to get to the Joe Scarborough clip where he's commenting on someone commenting. He's commenting on someone commenting on how violence. I'm guessing that, because he doesn't give it context, I'm guessing that the point of the original statement, the OP statement, the original poster's statement, is that the violence on Capitol Hill and the violence that was expressed by BLM and Antifa are both abhorrent and should be and should definitely be not be supported, right? And so his thing, and this is paraphrasing, he said, the riot on the Capitol Hill, the destruction on Capitol Hill compared to the destruction of a taco truck. No, jackass. He actually says that. No, jackass. I don't think it's like, wow. I won't go so far as to say, well, Joe Scarborough doesn't care about small business. However, it is insanely insensitive, hypocritical, and I think real expository of your bias, where you cannot see that violence and destruction is still violence and destruction, right? Zealotry, extremism is still zealotry and extremism. Now we can get into the nuance of, well, they burnt down. They didn't all burn. They weren't all mom and pop shops that they burnt down. They vandalized some corporate stores, and it's like, okay, I understand that, but those stores serviced the community. Despite them raising prices and giving shitty hours and things like that, they were still they were just like us getting the $600 is pence. It's nothing. It's pennies. It's still something, right? Giving us absolutely nothing is the absolute worst. Removing the only resources that are available, no matter how sparse, is the absolute worst, right? The utter destitution in an area, to create more destitution and destruction in an area that is already destitute and destroyed, seems like insanity to me, right? So the point I'm trying to get to is you will not find me condoning the destruction that is caused by any protest, BLM, Antifa, Trump, left, right, up, down, black, white, Puerto Rican, Asian. Doesn't matter. If you're about destruction, you're antithetical to your cause. Because your cause is ostensibly, and presumably, would be equal rights, equal treatment, equal acknowledgement as a human being amongst society. Well, that equality goes back and forth. It cuts both ways. You need to treat people like people to be treated like a person, That means respecting the ownership of their business, respecting their property. And here's the ultimate, not the penultimate thing. What I just said was the penultimate thing. The ultimate thing is that historically speaking, violent protests, violent uprisings don't work and are not sustainable. The only violent uprisings that have been, or revolutions that have happened that have sustained themselves, are communist. So Russia, North Korea, and there's not a lot of communist countries left. Vietnam is actually doing quite well, although I'm not sure if they're still a communist country. But initially, Vietnam was horrible. Cambodia, Pol Pot, right? So I digress. That being said, it doesn't matter. The LAPD can request the footage from any protest. It doesn't matter that the fact that they're mentioning BLM to me is a red flag, and it's suggestive. It's indicative of their bias, and that's all I'm about. I'm just like, give me the intel, leave your bias at the door. As soon as you're like, oh well, because for me it's always like, it's universal. When a person at any given point, whoever is running, let's just say there's a department for this. At any given point, the attitude of the department can change. And maybe they all of a sudden want to befriend BLM, and they turn this same ability on Jews. They turn this same ability on Puerto Ricans. They turn the same ability on environmentalists. Like the fact remains, the ability to do it. The function is the problem. Oh, it is right. It's I always say this: follow your principles, follow your policy, not a person. Not a politician or political party. It is the policy. It is the principle. It is the ability for the LAPD to use your fucking doorbell camera as spy footage, right? It doesn't matter on who. Well, no. Correction. It matters on who, because it will be citizens who more likely than not, hopefully, who are more likely than not, following the law and hopefully, civilly disobeying. They're civilly protesting. And here's the thing. We'll read on as I'm not sure of this. I've read about this, not this particular article, but I did know of this. I wanted to read this article because it was from Mashable. I'm a big fan of Mashable. I don't know if it requires a warrant, and I mean, it doesn't have to be protests that they're getting the footage for. And I mean, it's your doorbell camera. And it's like, I have so many questions. It's like, well, do they need the permission of the owner of the camera? Can this be gotten remotely? Do they need a warrant? And if they do need, so can they just get a warrant and obtain the footage without you even knowing? Let's find out. According to a report, says Mashable. This is only the third article. I'm so bad at this. According to a report by the Electronic Frontier Foundation, recently obtained documents from the LAPD show that law enforcement officials attempted to obtain footage from Ring devices in order to identify participants in BLM protests that occurred last summer. This doesn't say anything about well, let's keep reading. The LAPD is requesting your help, reads the subject line of emails sent to Ring users. Okay. So no warrant. Okay, but all right. So, okay. An official email, so they had to ask. An EFF, a digital rights a digital rights advocacy group, received the LAPD's email to a number of Ring users after submitting a public information request. In one example obtained, an LAPD official received footage from a user no more than 2 hours after sending the email request. The EFF says that important details such as dates, times, and even the purpose of the requests are redacted in the documents sent to them. One email sent at the end of May during the height of the BLM protests that were sparked after the police killings of George Floyd, included a request for footage relating to the recent protests. The LAPD has a partnership with Ring and its app Neighbors, which helps inform residents of local crime in their area. The purpose of the technology is to help crack down on robberies, car thefts, and other criminal activity, not aid the police in monitoring activities protected by the First Amendment. Yes, we realize that. And we realize that that's not its designed function. We're well aware. Technologies like Ring have the potential to provide the police with video footage covering nearly every inch of an entire neighborhood. This poses an incredible risk to First Amendment rights. People are less likely to exercise their right to political speech, protest, and assembly if they know that police can acquire and retain footage of them. This creates risks of retribution or reprisal, especially at protests against police violence. Ring, which makes popular video doorbells and security camera devices, is owned by Amazon. Amazon has long been criticized by privacy advocates and criminal justice experts for its facial recognition technology known as Rekognition, with a K. An ACLU study, for example, found that the Amazon's facial recognition was inaccurate and couldn't even identify members of Congress, yet Amazon was partnering with law enforcement agencies to use it. Of course, Jeff Bezos stepped down because the heat is really on Amazon right now. They just got their first union after a lot of controversy in their working conditions. People dying, people not being able to go to the bathroom, working like 14-hour shifts, etc. That's okay. He's going to push all of you out with automation anyway. I mean that cynically and seriously. I'm not laughing at your misfortune, but that's reality. Anyway, I digress. But Amazon is, since Alexa, right? If you Google, right? So yeah, technical difficulties. Sorry about that. What I was gonna say was that as far as Amazon and privacy issues, if you go and you Google Alexa listens sex, you get a slew of articles, and this is just one thing I always love to harp on in particular. But there are other things to speak about in terms of Alexa and Siri passively because they have to passively listen to you, so that when you say, "Hey Siri, hey Alexa," they can respond. So these articles come up. Alexa listens to users having sex. A report that says Daily Mail: Alexa can listen to users having sex with some audio heard, etc., etc. So yeah, privacy issues are real. Joe Biden playing as Luigi, and you're like, why is he so right? News coverage, the way, the angles, the type, the framing, right? I always emphasize this. 4 documentaries I think should be mandatory for anyone who's really interested in trying to get a sense of how politics, the machinations of politics works. 4 documentaries: Manufacturing Consent, because that's about the media element; American Blackout and Bernie Blackout are about the media element, the media and the inner workings of political parties, and how they mingle together, they co-mesh, they cohort together, they act in cahoots to undermine selective candidates, even of their own party. And Hacking Democracy is about electronic voting and the issues that were wrought in the very first election that we used electronic voting in. Unfortunately, there hasn't been, as far as I can recall off the top of my head, literally any other documentary that covers electronic voting, let alone as comprehensively as Hacking Democracy does. So, why am I bringing up? Well, that's why I'm bringing it up, because the coverage of Joe Biden is all soft. He gets softball questions. There is oh my God, during the inauguration, they were talking about how the fireworks looked like arms embracing the nation, and people were crying. And all right, the crying, I guess, can be excused to some degree. Although there was that one gentleman that was called a hypocrite. I forgot his name, the black guy, the black bald dude. He's a grifter too. So he rightfully got called out on The View of all places. However, the point I'm trying to make is just it's you're not going to get journalistic integrity from a media that spent 4 years, in some cases lying, but in some cases hyperbolizing and over-exaggerating what didn't need hyperbolization or exaggeration. The man was intolerable and detestable in and of himself. He didn't need the extra spin that news loved to do, and they would get called out for. And then because again, how's the phrase go? A lie travels halfway around the world before the truth puts its pants on. Nobody reads the retractions. Nobody reads the corrections. That's irrelevant. So I always just wanted to point that out. Melania is ignoring impeachment and jealous over attention Joe Biden is getting. And it's probably true. It wouldn't surprise me if it was true. However, I would like to point out, and I think this is actually one unfortunate aspect of becoming a trophy wife, right? That's what you get. One thing I will point out is if you recall the Christmas Story, right? She actually, the whole thing was that whole piece was a prime example of a manufactured narrative, like utterly fabricated. She wanted to do a piece on something, some sort of function that was supposed to go on at the White House to benefit children. And the clip that's always edited of the phone call that she had with somebody who I guess released the phone call, the entirety of the phone call, but it's only clipped out, is the clip of her saying, "Oh, children, oh, please, why would they want to cover that? Why would they cover that?" And the whole thing is that she was pointing out the fact that the news would not cover something that she was trying to do for children. She was pointing out satirically the nature of media, and of course they just ate that up. And because because when it first came out, I was like, oh, that figures, he's a monster, so why wouldn't she be? And I was like, well, let's actually just look into that for a second. And you just find the whole phone call and you can just listen to it. But whatever. No, it's not Trump himself, so it probably is still on YouTube. Right, and more examples of this. Rush Limbaugh dead at 70. And The Hill is just kind of like, all right, he's dead. He was a provocateur who became a hero to conservatives, but deeply angered and offended others with his remarks on race, gender, and a host of political issues. Now, that to me is journalism. That's what he did. That's not, there's no fallacy there. There's nothing hyperbolized. He was a provocateur. That's definitely well stated, right? There's no, I do not detect, maybe a hint of bias, but I don't really detect much there, right? However, they continue, as news of his death spread, supporters offered their condolences to Limbaugh's family while pointing to the longtime host as a champion of the conservative movement. The guy's dead, right? There's no need to slam him anymore. So instead of they themselves doing it, they cover others doing it. Let me see. The most I'll say about Rush Limbaugh is that he used his talents to make the world a worse place, wrote New York Times opinion columnist James Bowie. The left-leaning activist group Sleeping Giants, who has sought to put pressure on advertisers of conservative media, said Limbaugh was survived by other conservative hosts. They say nothing wants to work tonight. All right. So yeah, Rush Limbaugh, bigoted king of talk radio, dies at 70. Rush Limbaugh, the human megaphone who hijacked the GOP, dead at 70. So yeah, they're nice to you even in death. Oh man, decency, integrity, journalistic integrity, decency, good faith arguments. All of these things are just old news. Out of control, woke leftism and cancel culture from the U.S. is a threat to France because it attacks the nation's heritage and identity, French politicians and intellectuals say. I was discussing this with somebody that, they covered it on The Hill, or not The Hill, but Rising. And I did find it ironic. It is ironic given the sense of nationalist pride, of chauvinism that this country has, kind of stems from the chauvinism of the French. The thing about France, historically speaking, is that, they identify collectively as French. The whole idea is like they don't see, as far as I've, come to know, culturally, historically speaking, that they identify with class warfare, right? With the haves and the have-nots, as opposed to the haves and amongst the have-nots, the different intersections that have not less than others, essentially. They don't go into like special interest groups and things of that nature. Collectively speaking, they understand that the battle is really with those who are trying to consolidate wealth and keep it from them. So let's read from Daily Mail. French politicians, prominent intellectuals, and academics arguing against the influence of America's out-of-control leftism and cancel culture. They claim it is undermining French society and attack on French heritage. French President Emmanuel Macron in October cautioned against certain social science theories entirely imported from the United States. His education minister also warned of a battle to wage against an intellectual matrix from American universities. Politicians, prominent intellectuals, and academics in France have voiced concern that an out-of-control leftism and cancel culture in the U.S. is threatening French identity. They are arguing that American ideas on race, gender, post-colonialism, especially those coming from U.S. universities, are undermining French society and are an attack on French heritage. They shouldn't frame it in that light. They really shouldn't. Because the response then would be, oh, well, naturally, France, one of the great colonial powers of the previous centuries, would find it uncomfortable that, you know, we're identifying the atrocious actions of their history. Which is a fair rebuttal when your position is that, oh, well, what you're doing is undermining French society and an attack on French heritage. I mean, in the outset, identifying the historical atrocities of a country isn't terrible. It's how you proceed with that information, with that discerning. And actually, more important than how you proceed is how you discern it. Because everything is about perspective. If you look at it purely through the lens of basically any nation with white people that's been run by white people is bad, has always been bad, and will always be bad, anything you then do from that perspective is not going to be in good faith. It's not going to be positive, constructive. It's certainly not going to be about equality. That's where the hypocrisy comes in. That's where the poisoning of the well comes in. That's where, you know, not becoming the monster you're trying to slay comes in. If you act from the same position, from the same reasoning that your enemy does, you are your enemy. You're your enemy's friend. The collection of intellectuals, continuing the article, arguing that France is being contaminated by the leftism of America was buoyed. I always do this. It's buoyed last year after French President Macron appeared to side with them. In a speech in October on the fight against separatism, Macron warned against leaving the intellectual debate to others, as he cautioned of the certain social science theories entirely imported from the U.S. His education minister also warned that there is a battle to be waged, yes, against the intellectual nature. Oh my God, that's inflammatory. He said battle. There's a battle to be waged. Oh my God. The debate came to a head this week after the new director of the Paris Opera released a 66-page report on diversity at the company, in which he vowed to diversify staff and to ban blackface. Why are they still using blackface? It came after 5 black members of the ballet company circulated an open letter among the Paris Opera's 1,800 employees calling for greater diversity. Neef was targeted for the decision by far-right leader Marine Le Pen and by French newspaper Le Monde, which said he soaked up American culture for 10 years while he worked in Toronto. This month also saw the publication of a book by social scientists Stéphane Baude and Gerard New, I'm butchering these people's names, in which they claimed that race is a bulldozer that destroys other subjects. It isn't that race in and of itself is a bulldozer, it's that it's wielded as a bulldozer. These are all important issues. This is why nuance is so important, and it's interesting that intellectual, this is what I'm talking about bias. It's like, well, I understand the angle that they're coming from. I can agree with the angle they're coming from. I don't agree with how they're presenting it. It's one type of nationalism against another. Like the claim that race is a bulldozer that runs over other subjects is only true in the context of people who wield it like that, right? You can't tell me that there isn't any historical relevance to the misanthropic activities of a country. Like you can't say that your heritage is important and then suggest that the bad things that were committed in the name of that heritage should not be highlighted as well. Again, though, it should be highlighted from the lens, from the perspective of history, of understanding that we don't have to go back to where we came from, all right? That we didn't go back to where we came from to be where we are, and we don't have to be there to move forward. That you're supposed to mature. You're not supposed to crumble and become embittered. I think a lot of this, okay, because I'm an alcoholic. I've been sober for like 3.5 years, almost 4 now. And I think a lot of this stems, I'm not saying everyone needs to like be an addict and be in recovery, but I think a lot of this stems from, I don't want to say the lack of crises in this country, because there's definitely been an economic stranglehold that's only intensified over the decades. But really, the severity hasn't reached a peak point until COVID and the lockdowns and millions of people losing their job really simultaneously. Jobs, homes, medical security, financial security, food security. But then that only identified the disparity and not the maturity needed to deal with the problem. So instead of the problem being addressed in an appropriate manner, you have the politicizing of it. You have the hijacking of its seriousness, of its gravitas. And so the veritas, the truth of it, isn't really, it's buried. And it's sad and it's difficult because you have people on one end who don't understand, who only see violence and mayhem and mania. People who, like myself, like Daryl Davis, the black jazz gentleman who went in and basically de-radicalized to like hundreds of KKK members. His claim is 200. For me, I always hearken that to kills that soldiers get. It's like, you're counting how many, what if even in the darkest of the fog of war, and you shoot somebody and you don't know if you've really de-radicalized them, but you hope that you have. And the fact that you have a sustained continuous relationship with them, you being black, them being a white KKK member, says a lot. That of the ilk of Fred Hampton, who went so far as to get white nationalist groups, biker gangs and things like that. Everyone rallied around the understanding that it is the government who needs to be put in check, not each other, us who have nothing, who are scrambling around during Vietnam, who are scrambling around during a war we didn't want to be in a country that seemingly doesn't care about us. Right? Sound familiar? But I digress. Yeah. So, we're coming up on the bottom half of the show. Biden's disgraced deputy, his press secretary. Okay. So TLDR, his press secretary, Biden, TJ Ducklow, had a girlfriend. His girlfriend is a journalist that was assigned to cover the White House. So a political reporter found out about this and was going to did a piece. And before she did the piece, she called him, quote, and Ducklow was like, "I will destroy you if you reveal this." So then, the report came out, the quote came out, all of it came out. Excuse me. And then after a few days, he had to be fired, obviously. But this is the type of attitude that all White Houses have. Like, remember, it is the job of the press secretary to spin. It is the job of the director of communications to deal with the rhetoric that comes out of the administration. House of Cards, West Wing, they had it pretty accurate. Even Scandal has it accurate to a degree. Kerry Washington's character was a former director of communications. So she did all the speech writing. She did all the PR, then shaped the image and the voice of the administration. But, I was very surprised to see this even come out. And honestly, it's not like it's getting top billing. You don't see it really pressed in mainstream media. You don't see it on the telly. But there are articles out there written about it. Rising covered it. So I guess it's something. But really, again, this is about the softballing that the Biden administration is going to be getting in the future. Minus this one Politico article. Fulton County, Georgia elections board director fired. I just wanted to take a look at this because given how everything has unfolded, it is interesting that they decided to fire him. I'm pretty sure he stood by the election results. The county experienced a slew of issues last year during last year's election cycle, including long lines, problems with voting equipment, and absentee ballot delays. Barron faced criticism from Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger over delays caused by technical problems and staffing issues. These errors and inefficiencies waste taxpayer dollars. The department needs new leadership. Fulton County came under fire in November when President Trump's legal team accused the county of ballot dumping. This came after surveillance footage at the State Farm Arena caught election officials pulling four plastic bins from underneath desks. Officials egregiously violated state laws in order to solicit, facilitate, promote, and cheat and theft on a scale never seen before. These crooked and incompetent officials suspend signature verification. Questions remain on whether the election board has authority to remove Barron. The county's legal counsel is set to review the case. What does one say? I find it interesting that they waited until everything was said and done, even though they had experienced a slew of issues during last year's election cycle. So it wasn't like the November elections were the first time. But, there's a slew of new things happening now that he who shall not be named is gone. No, let's name him. His name is fucking Trump. We're adults. It's whatever. Republican support for Trump to play role in party up 18 points from early January. We're going to conclude on this note, by the way. I love to leave you hanging on just the happiest of notes. But we talked about this. The party is fractured in thirds. You have Trumpists, Trump loyalists. You have entrenched GOP members like Lindsey Graham, Minority Leader McConnell, and the gentleman from Ohio who's leaving. He's been there for 40 years as well. And then you also have, contemporary conservatives like Republicans, good old-fashioned Republicans, who are trying to figure out where the party is headed to, what direction they're leaning towards. Yet again, we have missed the COVID news. Japan kicks off COVID-19 vaccination drive. The world's first human challenge trials start in the UK for COVID. We'll see how that goes. Of course, de Blasio's calling for a full accounting of Cuomo's alleged nursing home death cover-ups. It's not alleged. His top aide admitted to it. The FBI and the U.S. Attorney are looking into it. And yeah, just tons and tons of fun. Also, given the pressures that Cuomo was under and the fact that other states, other democratically run governments are opening things up, he figures, maybe this will alleviate some of the pressure. So he's going to open up amusement parks, summer camps, and they'll be able to open as the state monitors COVID variants. So remember, we have the UK COVID variant here that we know is more contagious, but we don't know if it's deadlier. We're still waiting on the news on that. The CDC saying we need to wear double masks all of a sudden, as if that's going to be helpful. Meanwhile, people are opening up things in states all over the place. In New York, one of the hardest hit states in the nation for COVID, Cuomo decides, you know what, New York City, you deserve some fun time. Whatever. We just look at this and try to paint as clear a picture as possible. That being said, if you like what I'm doing, please like, share, and subscribe. Be well to yourself and to each other. Take care.